Hello and welcome to Open Format. You're watching next episode of an ongoing discussion on how we produced and made the series Talking History. Now, in this episode, I'll talk about how we went about the opening episode, the first episode of the series Talking History's Delhi leg. As you know, this podcast, the open format, is an open format in all literal sense. It's unscripted, it's a free flowing conversation, candid conversation on everything which is possible in the art of filmmaking from the perspective of my own experiences on how I went about making my short films and documentary features in the genre of history and culture. Well, going ahead, in the first episode of Talking History in Delhi leg, the first thing that we had to look at was the etymology, which means how a name of the city came about. दिल्ली का नाम दिल्ली कैसे पड़ा? इस शहर का नाम क्या शुरू से ही दिल्ली था? What was it called? Perhaps say 2000 years ago. How old is this city? So यही सब सवाल के हम जवाब ढूंढने बैठे. So we found that there are several data, there are several records which we had to examine and verify. We find that around 1600, which is just 400 years ago, in one of the passages, one of the history passages written by a Persian chronicler, Muhammad Qasim Farishta, he notes that the city was founded by a king named Dhelu. That was one. There were other versions as well. कई और राजाओं के कई और rulers के नाम सामने आए, taking into consideration the geographical confines of this area. What Delhi is today is absolutely a very small portion of a larger geographical area in which this region was talked about in the chronicler's writing. हम बात करेंगे chroniclers की, which include Muhammad Qasim Farishta, Abul Fazl, Ibn Battuta, even Al-Biruni for that matter. जितने भी chroniclers हैं who came to India, who came as traders, who came as scholars, who came as or who stayed as court chroniclers, let me correct myself, they stayed as court chroniclers, they worked in kingdoms of subsequent ruling dispensations. Well, that was one. There are several other passages about the city. If we talk about city in terms of a very altered geographical domain, what we see now. Perhaps 1400 years ago, this region was referred to in a different way. It was referred more from the point of view of the principalities, the outpost, what it was. तो हमारे लिए सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज उस टाइम पे ये था कि एक वेरीफाइबल फैक्ट्स, वेरीफाइबल हिस्टोरिकल अकाउंट रहे जिसके बाद से हम अपनी कहानी को शुरू करें. As I said, in 1620, which is much later, we had passages from Muhammad Qasim Farishta, who talks about the foundation of city, or to say the city was established by a ruler called Dhilu. Moving on, Prithviraj Raso talks about a passage in which Anangpal, interestingly, Anangpal is a king whose name has been associated with Delhi in more ways than one. So as we started reading more and more about Anangpal, we started researching more and more about Anangpal. There were certain passages, there were certain accounts which were very interesting. Prithviraj Raso talks about how a sage had asked the king of those days that there is a pillar which should not be taken out of the land. Out of curiosity, the king orders, okay, let's dig out that pillar and see what exactly lies beneath. Well, to his surprise, the pillar was resting on the hood of a serpent Vasuki. These are the tails. And as he tried to reinstall the pillar, he could not because the soil was loose. That possibly gave name or a characteristic to the soil of the city, Dhili, which is loose. So these are all tales, these are all chronicles. We're not saying that only one particular chronicle is correct, or for that matter, certain chronicle is correct whereas the other person is not correct, because in history, as I said, it's not just the written record. We also have to refer to the oral history. We also have to look at the bardic tales. We have to look at the sources. We have to look at the primary sources, secondary sources, and the oral history records. Now we found the research. We found the primary research based on the accounts of the chroniclers. But how do you replicate that in a visual medium? For visual medium, you need the places. You need to show कि कहाँ कोई palace था, or do we have any installation which is related to a particular person which is mentioned in the passage. तो as we started looking around, हमने देखा कि उस era के बारे में तो बहुत कम चीज़ें हैं. Yes, कोई महल नहीं है, but there are remains of the ramparts, the walls, which is now called Lal Kot. उस टाइम पर जो है यहाँ पे ये एस्टैब्लिश हो गया कि अनंगपाल द फर्स्ट वो इस ज़मीन के रूलर रहे हैं. ही वॉज द पर्सन वॉज द रूलर ऑफ दिस लैंड. Perhaps it was just a principality or a suzerainty of a larger kingdom, as I mentioned before. The first important historical installation that can be traced back to Anangpal's first rule is Mehraulи's iconic iron pillar. Measuring slightly higher than 23 feet, it's one of the most visited tourist spot in the larger Qutub complex. It has an inscription written in the later part Brahmi script, which talks about a victory of a king from Velika to Vanga. Now that is a region historically referred to as Punjab, the present Punjab and Bengal. So clearly, there was a king, there was a kingdom which had ruled the expanse from the west to east. To honor that king, the pillar was installed. Historians agree that the pillar is associated with Chandragupta II. तो ये हमें एक बड़ी इम्पॉर्टेंट इंस्टॉलेशन दिल्ली को लेके वहाँ पर मिली. हालांकि उस पर दिल्ली या कोई दिल्ली को लेके डायरेक्ट कॉनोटेशन नहीं थी. इट वॉज जस्ट सेलिब्रेटिंग अ विक्ट्री ऑफ अ ग्रेट किंग. मूविंग ऑन, Suraj Pal was another important figure, another ruler whose name comes after Anangpal the First. उनके टाइम पे कहा जाता है कि जो सूरज कुंड है, वहाँ के जो वाटर वर्क्स हैं, वहाँ की बेसिनरीज हैं, वहाँ पे जितने भी जो स्टेप स्टोन एम्बैंकमेंट्स हैं, those were constructed during Suraj Pal's time. So it was very important for us to understand why these embankments were built. Certainly, these embankments were built to store the water, and the water has to be for a dwelling or a population, a part of population would have lived around that area. तो सूरज कुंड काफ़ी इंपॉर्टेंट एम्बैंकमेंट्स है. इट एस्टैब्लिशेस कि वहाँ पर कुछ एक तादाद में जनसंख्या वहाँ पे रहा करती थी. एंड सर्टनली दे वुड हैव बीन अ सोसाइटी, सर्टनली दे वुड हैव बीन अ सेटलमेंट which was social, and they had certainly their own correlation with other kingdoms or other localities nearby. उसका रीज़न ये है कि when we dig deeper about Anangpal the second, जिनका जिक्र होता है around 10th century, उस टाइम पर he had constructed a dam. Now the dam is very important. To find out a dam would mean there is a population larger than possibly could have lived around a water masonries, because dams were built for a larger population, and certainly there was a mechanism to store, to control a water body which possibly would have been nearby. आज के टाइम पर वो डैम दिल्ली के कन्फाइंस में नहीं है. When we started looking for dam, of course it required a lot of meticulous research. और मैंने कहा कि क्योंकि विजुअल मीडियम है तो इसमें सिर्फ रिसर्च से काम नहीं चलेगा, इसमें सिर्फ किताबों से काम नहीं चलेगा. इसमें यू कैन नॉट कीप ऑन कोटिंग द सब्जेक्ट. यू रियली हैव टू शो योर व्यूअर्स, योर ऑडियंस कि हम किसके बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. We started looking for this dam and we found Anangpur village in फरीदाबाद. आज के टाइम में फरीदाबाद में स्थित है अनंगपुर विलेज, और वहीं पे एक बीहड़ में जाके जो है इन वन ऑफ दोस वो ravines and a little woody area, we'll find the remains of the dam. It's pretty massive dam. आजकल की अगर हम बात करें तो it's built totally of stone. It's fairly strong, and you can still get to see the flanks of the dam. So उसको प्रोफाइल करने के बाद we got the story. At least we can say very clearly, very confidently, that Anangpal or Anangpal's clan was responsible for establishing the settlement around what is Delhi NCR, or to say primarily South Delhi and the NCR, Faridabad. As I said earlier, the ancient remains in Delhi are hard to find. Yes, there was a city of Indraprasth, the ancient city of Indraprasth. There are historical records for that, that it was a settlement which existed where our current Purana Kila stands in the central zone of Delhi. So, going back in the art of filmmaking, it's really important that we also have to show these visual elements so as to supplant a research work what we have done. No matter how best a research is, no matter how much deeper you have dug into the primary sources and the secondary sources, but for a documentation, for a visual documentation, it's important to have visual. तो यहाँ पे थोड़ा सा extra mile जाने की ज़रूरत पड़ती है, and this is what we achieved while filming for the series. And this wasn't it. We found a couple of very interesting places, very important spaces which have been associated with Delhi. It has its own history, it has its own narratives, tales, oral history, which I'll keep discussing as we move forward in the open format. So please like, subscribe, and follow open format and keep giving me your feedback. I need to know what more you want to hear. I need to know what is that you like in particular in the art of filmmaking. Thank you. Stay tuned to the open format. See you soon.